And so we will go ahead and open up with the affirmative. Is God necessary for ethics?
Well, good evening. I wish to invite you all to time travel with me this evening. We're going back to April 1945. We were traveling to a small town near Weimar in Germany. Captain Frederick Koffer is leading advanced patrol from the 6th Armored Division, a portion of the American forces, driving into Germany. He is the first to come across the Buchenwald concentration camp, located on a hill not far away from the quaint German town of Weimar. Together we stand before the barbed wire fence to look upon 20,000 emaciated, filthy prisoners, the survivors of the horror of Buchenwald. The world united to destroy the evil of the Nazi regime and only barely managed to defeat it. But tonight I have to ask us all here, what if the Germans had prevailed? What if they had managed to get the atomic bomb and use it on one of their V-2 rockets against, say, London? Clearly, world history would be completely different. But here is the question for us tonight. Would the horror of Buchenwald be any less wrong if the world never knew of its existence because everyone died and the people who perpetrated those horrors were victorious? We answer that question unambiguously and clearly tonight. Ethics and morality amongst mankind exist and can be known because men are made by God in his image. Every guard at Buchenwald was an image bearer of God, as was every victim. The guards and the perpetrators knew that what they were doing was evil from the start. They could not escape their createdness, nor the witness of the law of God written upon their consciences. It did not matter that they were doing the bidding of the current government in charge in Germany. It did not matter their leaders had been proclaiming the Jews and others to be subhuman. What they were doing was objectively a moral evil, and the context could not possibly change that reality. We live in a time where the numbers killed by the Nazis are dwarfed by the massacre of innocent preborn children in plain-looking buildings safely tucked into our neighborhoods all across our nation. At the same time, our cultural insanity has overwhelmed us, where we now allow 8-year-olds to choose their gender and then proceed to mutilate their bodies and condemn them to a lifetime of disease and dysfunction. We cannot even attempt to answer the question, what is a woman or what is a marriage, without being called a bigot or a hater. Serious consideration of morality and ethics has been replaced by emotionalism and a permanently established state of childhood all across the academic landscape. Challenge anyone's feelings and they immediately run for a safe space. Jeff Durbin and I stand here this evening to say unequivocally, Buchenwald was a moral nightmare, a clear violation of the standards God has built into his own creation. Likewise, the slaughter of innocent preborn children, the mutilation of born children, and the profaning of the covenant of marriage are ethical disasters and great moral evils. But to many who have been raised in public schools over the past decades, the immediate objection comes to mind, who are you to decide these things? What if you offend someone with your views? What if someone claims to be hurt by your position? Doesn't that make you evil? Aren't morality and ethics just human constructs that recent history has proven to be altered and changed by polls and elections? To these objections, we respond with clarity. Morality and ethics require a standard from outside the human realm, and that standard has been provided to us and preserved for us in the Christian scriptures. We do not flinch for a second at the trained response of the public-schooled mind to such a claim. It has become dogma in our day that all religious claims are mythical in nature and are subordinate to science. It is even more outrageous, we know, to not only say God is required as the source of morality and ethics, but the specific triune God of the Christian faith. How exclusive! But of course, we do not even stop there. No, as audacious as it is in the early 21st century in the United States, we stand here this evening to proclaim to all who will hear, there is an empty tomb in Jerusalem, and because it once housed a beaten and broken corpse, but only briefly, and then gave up that corpse to the unstoppable power of new life, resurrection life, we now live in the light of that empty tomb. The one who arose is seated at the right hand of the Father on high, where he has been exalted as King of kings and Lord of lords. And this historical event, supernatural as it is, has changed forever this world and everything in it. It should be obvious to all of us that if indeed that tomb is empty, as it is, and if indeed that one who predicted his own death, burial, and resurrection not only accomplished these acts, but has ascended on high, we need to know how we must live in light of this history-forming reality. Do we just keep on keeping on, doing as we please, or must we seek to know what this divine judge demands of us? It is the Christian message that we can indeed know his standards and his law, and hence every moral and ethical system must be brought into line with that law. Long ago, one of Jesus' disciples, Paul, stood before the Greek philosophers at the Areopagus and uttered these amazing words, quote, "Therefore God, having overlooked the times of ignorance, is now commanding all men everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day in which he will surely judge the inhabited world in righteousness by a man he has appointed, having furnished proof to all by raising him from the dead." We must feel the weight of this announcement even this evening. The resurrection of Christ from the dead is provided to all men, including all of us here, as evidence of the fact that there is a day fixed when God will judge the entire inhabited world, all who have ever lived or are living or will live. He will do so justly, in righteousness, and he will do so by the one who lived a perfect life, gave that life on Calvary's tree, and rose again the third day. If judgment is so central to God's purposes as the scriptures reveal over and over again, then the standard by which that judgment will be made must be clearly known. And it is clearly known.
I want a timer. I definitely need it.
We know.
Thank you all so much for being here and sacrificing your time and attention to this vitally important subject. I want to personally ask you all to pay very close attention this evening, not only to what is coming out of our mouths, that is the claims that we're making, the things that are coming out of us, but what we are standing on or carrying into the debate. This debate this evening isn't summarized in the piecemeal arguments or attempts at particular evidences or claims made by either side. This debate is a collision of total life and worldviews. That is to say, both sides are carrying bags into this discussion. These bags are the underlying assumptions or presuppositions that come from our worldviews. They are either bags filled with cash that we can justifiably spend to purchase the emotions that we draw on when decrying evil or calling anything evil, or on our appeals to logical consistency we demand, or the necessary rules to have integrity and not lie to you in this debate, or the appeals made to human value and dignity. Just consider what's happening in front of us all right now. Our opponents, I think, are very brave to enter into a public debate attempting to provide a foundation for ethics from their worldview. Here we have two men who are variously identified as devout atheists, humanists, who have claimed that there is absolutely nothing supernatural. That is, nothing outside of the natural, physical, or material universe, who believe that humans exist on a continuum of purposeless, meaningless, time and chance acting on matter. Human beings, according to their most basic ontology or metaphysics, are the descendants of bacteria and fish, alongside other random results of evolutionary processes. We are bags of purposeless stardust, to quote Carl Sagan, one of their patron saints. Cosmic broccoli, as another atheist, Dan Barker, has claimed. Meat, bone, protoplasm, and a cosmos that doesn't care about us. They're brave bringing those bags in here, trying to justify and argue that their worldview can provide a cogent philosophical justification or warrant for their claims. They don't have the cash to spend in those bags, the cash necessary to make meaningful appeals to your emotions, to appeal to human value and dignity, to appeal to universal, immaterial, unchanging, and necessary laws of logic, or absolute and transcendent ethical laws. Absolute standards of morality or ethics do not comport with their view of the world and humans. Their worldview is bankrupt. They don't have the money to spend with you all tonight. However, they will make claims. They'll assume human value and dignity, the demand for honesty in this debate, the principle of induction, or the uniformity in nature to examine evidence and trust the basic reliability of sense perception, and they'll demand the need for consistency and holding to the law of non-contradiction. However, in doing so, what they'll be doing is sneaking their hands into our bags to borrow capital from the Christian worldview that they don't have. I want to encourage you to watch their hands this evening, because stealing is wrong from the Christian worldview. Watch for the unjustified claims, the appeals to emotions that don't belong to the descendants of bacteria, the claims that contradict their most basic worldview assumptions. Watch them as they act like there are things that humans ought to do and ought not to do. Our esteemed opponents have agreed to show up to a fight without the worldview credentials to do so. Respectfully, you don't need Christian ministers to tell you that. Dr. Will Provine, the now deceased and renowned professor of biological sciences at Cornell University, a man who shared their worldview, he held the same bags as them, once said, quote, "Let me summarize my views on what modern evolutionary biology tells us loud and clear, and I must say that these are basically Darwin's views. There are no gods, no purposeful forces of any kind, no life after death. When I die, I am absolutely certain that I'm going to be completely dead. That's just all. That's going to be the end of me. There is no ultimate foundation for ethics, no ultimate meaning in life, and no free will for humans either," unquote. Dr. Provine was correct. He was being honest about what his atheistic presuppositions lead to, although as an atheist, he didn't have to be. According to Provine, our atheist and humanist opponents don't have justifiable right to appeal to ethics in any meaningful or ultimate way. They have no warrant to appeal to any ultimate meaning in life, nor do they, given that they are simply cosmic accidents whose brains are just doing what their biochemical responses do under these conditions, have any philosophically coherent right to think that they are thinking in any meaningful way. They're just dancing out their DNA, as Dawkins has said. On the one side tonight, cosmic broccoli. On the other side, image bearers of God, of the true and living God, the only eternal God, human beings with value, dignity, and purpose, who reflect the glory and power of the triune God of Holy Scripture. Make no mistake, we are not neutral, and neither are our opponents. We're not arguing for a general form of theism to justify morality or ethical appeals. As a matter of fact, we would happily join our opponents in refuting those other claims of general theism. We freely confess to carrying bags in here tonight as well. So what's in our bags? Our bags are filled with real value and philosophical currency. We have treasure to offer you. We are claiming that the Christian God revealed in Holy Scripture is a necessary foundation for justified, true belief regarding all ethical claims. Without the Christian God, you can't prove or justify anything. Reject his revelation in history, and you become a fool, intellectually and morally. If you want certainty in the realm of ethics, you need Jesus, friends. Without him, salvation isn't possible, and without him, neither is knowledge. The claim of Scripture is that in Christ are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. God and his character are the necessary transcendent reference point for meaningful claims or appeals to ethics. God is the unchanging, eternal, sovereign God. He has revealed himself clearly and without confusion through the natural order, through his prophets and apostles in history, and supremely in the incarnation, when the second person of the Trinity condescended, took on flesh, walked among us, lived the perfect, righteous, and truly ethical life that we have failed, died for sinners, and conquered death as a matter of historic record. The God of the Bible is the principium. His revelation is the reference point. He does not appeal to a standard outside of himself. His law is a reflection of his own eternal and unchanging character. Righteousness and justice are measured and revealed by him. Abandon that at your own philosophical peril. Abandon him and lose any meaningful or coherent appeals to ethical responsibilities or anything transcendent. All appeals to ethics, apart from God as the reference point, are meaningless and incoherent. Let's take a look at an example. Just this week, a wicked and murderous woman who lived pretending to be a man, named Audrey Hale, went armed into a Christian school and murdered 6 innocent human beings, including 3 small children. We all feel the grief and the weight of that, including our opponents, atheists and Christians alike. The question is this: which side gets to grieve and complain in a justified and meaningful way? According to the Christian worldview, what happened in Nashville was murder. It was the unjustified taking of human life. God explicitly commands against this. You shall not murder, Exodus 20:13. The law of God is transcendent. God is love. Scripture commands love does no harm to its neighbor. Those innocent children and those adults were made in the imago Dei. They had purpose, meaning, value, and dignity. They were not cosmic accidents. Furthermore, the police officers who killed the murderous and wicked woman were acting justly in protecting the innocent and preserving human life by taking the life of that truly evil woman. But what do we get when we look at Nashville through the lens of the devout atheist? What happened in Nashville was merely the scattering of protoplasm. One random result of evolutionary processes walked into a building and caused other cosmic accidents to stop breathing. So what? There's nothing above the Nashville shooter but sky, clouds, and vast emptiness. No justice is ahead of Audrey, and there is no absolute standard of justice to hold her to. You'll forgive me, everyone, for being so callous in this description, but we have to be honest about what atheist presuppositions give us. When human beings are absolutized and put at the center, then what happened in Nashville wasn't absolutely evil. No ultimate ethical law was violated in Nashville. Atheist Richard Dawkins explains, quote, "The universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference." River out of Eden, unquote. The atheists and humanists will try to get around this glaring deficiency in their complaints about Nashville. They'll attempt to have you divert your eyes from the empty bags they're carrying. They'll claim what happened in Nashville caused pain, to which we should say, so what? Some random results of evolutionary processes like to inflict pain. They enjoy it. It makes them happy, and you aren't in charge of them. They'll try to avoid the glaring philosophical bankruptcy in their worldview, their ethical worldview, by claiming, we've decided as a society that we shouldn't cause harm, to which we remind them of societies run by Stalin, Hitler, Mao, and Pol Pot. They like to inflict harm, and you aren't in charge of them. Furthermore, if our esteemed unbelieving opponents believe that ethical obligations are based upon societal convention or the agreement of the masses, then we must remind them graciously of the time when in this nation society believed it was ethical to kidnap and enslave our black brothers and sisters. A sin and a crime, by the way, that God commanded capital punishment for. I want us all to remember that what happens in a godless universe just happens. It just is. When we absolutize human beings in their postulated godless world, what one human being does to another is ultimately morally irrelevant and illusion. Michael Ruse was right. In his essay called Evolution and Ethics in New Scientist, he said, in an important sense, ethics as we understand it is an illusion fobbed off on by our genes to get us to cooperate. Ethical codes work because they drive us to go against our selfish day-to-day impulses in favor of long-term group survival and harmony. Furthermore, the way our biology forces our ends is by making us think that there is an objective higher code to which we're all subject. Ethics is a shared illusion of the human race. So, my friends, watch. We humbly ask you to watch. Watch as our friends write checks with their mouths that their worldviews can't cash. I thank you for being here.
The question before us this evening, is God necessary for ethics? We'll now have a 20-minute opening statement from the negative side.
I'm scared to speak here because according to Pastor Durbin, I'm a dangerous man, So hopefully you'll find that that's not true. In fact, I'm honored and humbled to be here in this same podium with Director Dr. James White, and our pastor Jeff Durbin. And I thank my old friend, Pastor Jason Wallace of Christ Presbyterian Church of Magna, and of course, Ratio Christi for doing this event here. It's a great thing to do, this debate and dialogue. That's how we expand our ideas and views, get to understand each other, and that's very important, and that's exactly what we're doing. So just one note of caution, which is not per Jeff Durbin, we came here to fight. We didn't come here to fight. We came here to exchange ideas, to learn from each other, because I believe that that's exactly how we enrich ourselves. So we're not here to fight. We're here to exchange ideas. Just want to let you know that. Now, time is very short for an opening statement, so many of the ideas that I'm going to give you, they are in a very constrained and summary format. I cannot explain them too much because there are so many internal intricacies and all that. Hopefully, down the road in the subsequent time that we have, we'll get a chance to explain some of them a bit more. But I would like to give you an overview, even though in a summary format, to get to show you where we are coming from, okay? Hopefully that will be helpful. The question of this debate is God necessary for ethics? The answer to that is a resounding no. And let me explain why. Firstly, when we make God the basis of ethics, and in this case we have found out it's already a Christian God, that is what they're talking about. The question, of course, first is there are at least 50 major religious sects, at least 100 or so not so major religious sects, and maybe 200 or 300 minor sects and then small religious forces, movements, all that. They all have their God. They all have their gods. Okay, so the question is then, which God are you going to go for? We did not find anything here to justify their idea of God other than they're coming up with their own God. The question naturally is, of all these 300 or more so God, maybe there would be more, gods and goddesses, which one should we go for? Which one should we talk? Now, if we say, no, it has to be our God is moral, we have to justify that with reason. Instead, if we try to do it by force, that no, it has to be our God, my way or highway, then that is the end of morality. That's where we breed violence, intolerance, and that's not morality. So the moment we try to show that there is one particular God, as they're saying, that is to be preferred of all these other 300 gods or so, we need to find out why. We did not find any such reason here because there are so many gods. We don't know what they stand for. Okay, then that's one big problem. Just it shows that we have to have something else besides to start with God, and that's reason, rational discourse, mutual understanding. Okay, the next question I would like to ask is, does such a God exist, whatever God we choose? And that's a very important question because now in this case, we have already chosen a Christian God. We know that it cannot be rationally proved, meaningfully proved that a Christian God exists. Throughout the tradition, the Christian theologians, I can name all of them and their books and their ideas, no time for that. They have tried to give arguments to show that such gods exist because they don't want to show that their faith is a blind faith, it's a dogma, so they want to give reason to be respectable, to be acceptable. All those reasons fail. There are 5 main reasons for God's existence. They all have fatal flaws. They don't prove that God exists. So therefore, that's yet another problem. So we have to bring in something other than God. Now, then of course comes the veracity of scriptures. We have seen that they have quoted from the Bible quite a lot, okay? How can we be so sure that if the scripture contains God's words, well, how do we know that? The Bible, for example, was collected, put together nearly 2,000 years ago, during a very primitive time by primitive folks. And Jesus, in fact, when he died after that, it was not for at least 40 years the synoptic gospels were put together. During those 40 years, do you know how many ideas floated around? How do you know for sure those primitive folks kept Jesus' ideas exactly the way he spelled out and they're in the Bible? We don't know that. So therefore, this sort of blind faith in the scripture, that's not a very good idea either. So we have to bring in something else rather than blind faith and dogma, okay? So what are some of the fundamental ethical presuppositions? The ones I'm going to put here, everybody should agree, regardless of what religion or outside of any religion they stand. There happen to be, these fundamental ethical presuppositions happen to be autonomy of the individual, what we call agency. An individual cannot be a robot. To be a moral agent, that person has to have autonomy, okay? Everybody should agree with that. Then reciprocity, which we often call the golden rule. It's there in all religions. In fact, it has been there in human history in all religions way before Christianity came into being, in Buddhism and all other religions. So in some form or other, the golden rules, the idea of reciprocity, respecting the other person as you would like to be respected yourself, okay? And then the question of responsibility. Can you think of morality without responsibility? So these are the fundamental presuppositions of morality. And these concepts are universal in the sense that in some form or other, different religions, different cultures, different folks, God believers or not, they all agree to some version of that. It's there all along. This is an empirical observation, you don't have to take my word for it. But just because they're universal, they're not vacuous. Often universal statements are empty, they're vacuous. They're not vacuous, they're contextual. But often which are contextual, they could be relativistic, and morality cannot be relativistic. They're contextual at the same time, they're universal, they're not vacuous. It's a nice balance and tension in that, and that's the beauty of these moral concepts, that they are universally applicable in ways that people find suitable to them. But there are some basic core there, okay? Now, these concepts are related to the concepts of right and wrong, and these are central moral concepts, and these are secular concepts, right or wrong. Whereas, if we bring in the religious idea of morality, that morality is based on God, then we get into this idea of sin and righteousness. These are religious concepts, and they're meaningful only to a bunch of believers, not otherwise, not to the outsiders. But morality cannot be segmented into these different groups, and because then it gets hopelessly relativistic. And so I'll get to that point just in a minute. So the whole idea is that ethics is essentially a human enterprise based on these concepts that I told you about, and the difficulty of bringing in God that I mentioned a bit earlier. It's essentially a human enterprise. In fact, if I can quote one line from Jared's statement he's going to come up with after I finish, he says, the root of ethics is caring and cooperation. And caring and cooperation are a feature of life. He's so right, Morality is from human to human, We don't need to go up there and come down via that extra outside route, in a way that is not needed. It's directly from one human to the other, and human groups to other human groups and amongst themselves. That's where morality is, right here, not that way. That is cumbersome, okay? And of course, based on what up there, we don't know. I told you about the problems if we try to go from there. Now, so when it comes to sin and righteousness, these concepts, the religious concepts, they're only meaningful to believers of that religion, but they generate guilt and shame and fear. Now, these are not moral concepts, and they are very unhealthy, no question, but they are very useful in putting people into place, They're good for controlling, and they're good for manipulation, these ideas. And these are not moral way to do it, okay? So the point is that to believe in a God without any reason, it's a dogma. And a dogma which is not based on reason and open-mindedness, human experience, meaning a meaningful dogma, that dogma is top-down, not bottom-up, like morality should be, based on human experience, human life. And when that happens, that dogma is not good to base ethics on, okay? Ethics cannot be based on dogma. So this idea of my way or highway, that generates tension, conflict, and violence. And history is replete with how Christianity has led to violence all around. In fact, when it comes to violence, Christianity stands number one in the whole world history, followed a distant second is, of course, Islam. Anyway, I will get later on into some of the other traditions to show that there are really even religious traditions which are profoundly moral without a belief in God. Anyway, that will come later in our segment later. Okay, so I would like to just simply put myself down here now with this idea that dogma should not be the basis of ethics, so we need to have reason. Now, the thing is that God is a dogma the way it's put unless we bring in reason. But the point is this, a dogma can be reasonable. A dogma is never rational, keep that in mind. But it can be reasonable if it's put to good use. If we can use it good ways to bring people close to morality, to make them more compassionate, kind, caring, sharing, and all those, To that extent, the dogma can be reasonable, meaning it's helpful, but it can never be rational. So God could be helpful when it comes to morality, but it can never be the basis of morality. Please keep that in mind. There's a big distinction between the two. Something that's helpful is always welcome, but let's not make it a dogma and make morality based on that, okay? Quite a few ideas. Some of them will be unpacked later. I'd like to leave it at that right now.
Thank you, Pastor Durbin, for spending your time arguing a version of our side. Makes it efficient. I don't know whether it's appropriate or inappropriate as the closing member of the opening statements to observe that this is an impossible debate. You should feel impressed that we are trying to pull it off. Are you not entertained? Name the movie. You can believe that God is necessary for ethics. You can presuppose that God is necessary for ethics. We may have seen some of that tonight. But I believe it is functionally impossible to debate that God is necessary for ethics. Yes, we can reduce our definition of God so much that it becomes tautological and God becomes necessary for ethics. Okay, if God is whatever brought us into existence, and existence is necessary for existence, then yes, in some minimal way, God is necessary for ethics. God is demonstrably real. You were not expecting that, were you? In that God is an idea that people, most people, actually believe in, making God an intersubjective reality. Intersubjective should be the $20 word that you walk away with. You could also assert that humans are functionally God, a position that I support, but these minimal definitions of God cancel themselves out. If ethics are a human phenomenon, or more precisely, an extrapolation of social behavior of living creatures, then God is not necessary for ethics. The question of whether God is necessary for existence would be an interesting debate. The question of which conception of God is most ethical would be another interesting debate. The question of whether belief in God is helpful for morality would be yet another interesting debate. That's a debate I would probably be on the affirmative for. But that's not the debate we are having in this moment. I'm using morality to describe the system of belief relating to what is right and wrong, and ethics as the analysis of that system. Either to establish or study it, ethics is the art and science of studying morality. We could also have robust debates about the ways that the idea of God and belief in God is problematic for ethics, which perhaps we'll get into a bit later. It is worth mentioning that God could exist and still not be necessary for ethics. Thousands of years ago, Plato asked, which is bigger, God or good? Is the pious loved by the gods because it is pious, or is it pious because it is loved by the gods? That's known as Euthyphro's dilemma. Even if you fervently believe in God, even if God does exist, God is not necessary for ethics. Only you need to exist for ethics to exist. We in this moment are enough. We being here having this debate means that God is not necessary for ethics. Here's how it works. You hurt them. Now say you're sorry. Hopefully all of us have had an experience like this. Perhaps the person we hurt was a brother or sister or friend, but all of us have had the experience of being told that we hurt someone else, being told that our actions matter, that our actions impact others. Most of us have stories of childish cruelty that we need to grow out of. Anyone else burn ants with a magnifying glass? I'm sorry about that. Other actions are wrong because they weaken our character and are out of alignment with our goals, like cheating. Being ethical means being a good member of society, being a good member of the groups we are a part of. Being a good person means that we act in alignment with the best interest of the well-being of others. What it means to be a good person is a conversation we all have. It is a conversation we inherit. It is a conversation we have throughout our lives. If you want to confirm that ethics are innate, just cut cake at a 6-year-old's birthday party. God is not necessary for ethics because ethics are a part of life. Ethics emerge from us sharing life together. It is the task of a lifetime to understand that other people matter just as much as we do. Far too many of us never get to that point. Even toddlers can begin to understand that different people have different preferences. There was a great experiment involving broccoli and goldfish. The toddlers could not understand why adults want broccoli. Ethics can be distilled to a single equation. Every action should be defensible to the ideal version of all those impacted by that action. Every action should be defensible to the ideal version of all of those impacted by that action. We should avoid hurting others because they matter the way we matter. If we have to hurt them, we should be able to explain and defend why we are hurting them, like there's a wasp on their head, or they're paying us to hurt them because we're their personal trainer. Ethics exist because you exist. If you don't exist, please do come talk to me after. Humans exist, we are talking about ethics. Again, ethics are a cultural conversation. We inherit social norms. We grow up with family traditions, some healthier than others. We navigate preferences and needs of our loved ones. All of these decisions and requests and conversations involve ethics. In the entertaining book, How to Be Perfect, Michael Schur, the author of the excellent show The Good Place, reviews major ethical theories. I'm a fan of Aristotle's virtue ethics, which describes a balance of ideals that we should all strive for. I believe that all of our traits can be expressed in a healthy, virtuous way. Utilitarianism seeks the greatest good for the greatest number of people, which I feel is best balanced by focusing on well-being rather than pleasure. Deontology seems like a dodge to me, a fancy way of saying do the right thing, without necessarily explaining how to define right, but functionally the right thing is yet another intersubjective reality established through intergenerational cultural conversation. Lots of very smart people have explored interpersonal ethics, which I am describing in my arguments. Emmanuel Levinas emphasized our basic duty to the other. Similarly, T.M. Scanlon's book, What Do We Owe to Each Other, emphasizes interpersonal morality, which requires that we be able to justify our conduct to others. John Rawls' veil of ignorance uses our self-interest to pivot towards what others want and need. Carol Gilligan's Ethics of Care also focuses on interpersonal relationships and our duty to care for others. Seems obvious when we talk about it, but applying these principles in our lives requires mastery and more self-awareness than most people prefer. When I was a believing Latter-day Saint at UNC Chapel Hill, I expressed my faith, bore my testimony to my then PhD advisor, Bar Ehrman, thusly, one of two things is true. Either God exists and God communicates to us through our physiology, psychology, and sociology, in other words, our brains, bodies, and groups, or God exists and communicates to us, and we are created, evolved in such a way that we believe in God. Whether or not you believe we are created or evolved, our bodies and brains are, I will wrap up. As a chaplain, I affirm faith and spirituality, and I work with people in the most difficult moments of their lives. I support people as they die, support people from any religious background or none at all. I am able to do this because I connect at the level of human needs and experience. Questions of meaning and the reality of connection and support are also human. God is not necessary for grief or support or resolution. We humans supporting each other does the work traditionally attributed to gods and angels. God is not here in this auditorium as best as we can tell. Many here may believe that God has an influence in this auditorium, but I hope that we can all agree that we are more certain that we are here than that we are certain that God is here. The presence of God is up for debate, literally. But again, we can all be certain that we are here. We are here talking about ethics. Therefore, God is not necessary for ethics. Thank you.
Some of you have begun texting me questions. It will make it a lot easier if you specify to whom, to which individual or to which side, the affirmative or the negative on the question that you wish it asked. Otherwise, I'm just going to guess wildly. But we will now have a 10-minute rebuttal from the affirmative in rebutting the negative.
We just heard it said that only you need to exist to do ethics. So, when the North Korean prison guard comes up to you and blows your head off with an AK-47, do your ethics vanish? And are his ethics therefore established as proper ethics because he continues to exist, but only for a certain period of time? You see, once you reduce this subject to, well, this is just us talking amongst ourselves, you have to deal with the reality that right now in North Korea, in China, unspeakably evil things are taking place. And they're taking place with the government saying this is the proper ethical and moral thing to do. And in our own country, right now, in this state, in small little buildings in our neighborhoods, innocent little children are being torn apart in their mother's wombs. And this society right now, just in this past week, has demonstrated that when it is said that we inherit social norms, really, I can guarantee you one thing. The way that this nation has responded to what happened in Nashville is not how this nation would have responded to the same events when I was a young person, say, in 1975. Not even close. So what has changed? We need to be thinking about this because, to be honest with you, our society is coming apart at the seams. And once you say, well, ethics requires autonomy, that means we can come up with 350 million different systems of ethics because we, as autonomous individuals, get to just look at the universe and come up with our own way of thinking. You can't keep a society together like that, and that's not how this great nation was ever built. I can assure you of that. So what's the difference here? Well, you have to, if you're going to say God's required, then you have to figure out which God. Let me try this one more time. Listen carefully. There is an empty tomb in Jerusalem. You have to explain that. Islam has no empty tomb. Muhammad's tomb, everybody knows where Muhammad's tomb is. There is an empty tomb in Jerusalem, and you have to explain how the man who came out of that tomb predicted his own death, burial, and resurrection. When you predict your own death, burial, and resurrection, and then you rise from the dead, you get to tell the rest of us what to do. Because you are our maker. we need a user's manual right now. It's like everybody in our society has decided, you know what? I'm gonna pick up my iPhone, and I don't care how they designed it to be used. I'm just gonna use it any way I want to. Well, it's not gonna function very well that way because there are instructions. And without instructions, we're simply left with, well, utilitarianism. We just want to do the best thing for the most people. Except Stalin didn't do that. And by the way, if you say Christianity has brought about the most violence, Stalin blew that standard away a long, long time ago. It's atheism that has brought the most violence to the world, by no question on that level. Why? Because atheism says there is no God to tell us what is right and wrong, what is just and what is unjust. We need a standard from outside of ourselves because we are creatures. We are made in the image of God. The only reason that there is any kind of consistency in the moral and ethical systems around the globe is because we are made in the image of God. Read Romans chapter 1. If you've never read Romans chapter 1, I invite you tonight, sit down, read it, and sit back and go, how did that ancient man know so much about us today? He knew it because he was writing inspired scripture and has given us that standard from outside of ourselves.
Well, I greatly respect the men, the image bearers of God to my right, and I was saddened to hear Dr. Chatterjee say that he didn't come to fight. That's unfortunate. I did. And that's because truth matters and it's worth fighting for. These are not just philosophical games that we're playing tonight. Mr. Anderson said that he talked about being at the bedside of people and grieving over people dying. He's borrowing again. I hope you caught it. He believes that his ancestors were bacteria. He believes he lives on a continuum of purposeless time and chance acting on matter. People don't shed tears when rocks tumble off a cliff and shatter. So he's borrowing. Dr. Chatterjee asked the question of which God. We answered that. He says we have to justify that, not according to his devout atheism. We said that it was the Christian God, the triune God of Holy Scriptures, that apart from him you cannot prove anything. Reject his revelation, you become a fool intellectually, morally. You have no justification for universal, unchanging, immaterial laws of logic and consistency. Are the descendants of bacteria obligated to hold to these immaterial laws? Are they universal? Have you ever smelled the law of logic? Felt one, weighed one, tasted one? If we believe that there's no supernatural, as Mr. Anderson believes, there's nothing supernatural, then how do you get immaterial, unchanging, invariant laws with that worldview? No, not with their worldview do we need to justify anything or be consistent. With the Christian worldview, you do, because you have a God whose mind is the standard, who cannot lie, that is to say, he cannot engage in logical contradiction. So when we engage in the question of ethics and we are having this conversation expecting consistency, we have to have a standard underneath us, not just social convention and cooperation. This debate, by the way, isn't about the existence of God. It's about whether the Christian God is necessary for ethics. Dr. Chatterjee, when he started with that in his opening, challenging which God and we need to prove God's existence, he isn't in the debate yet, unfortunately. We'd happily debate that. We already have here. If they'd like to do it, we will. He announced some standards. We have a foundation for ethics. We have autonomy. We have reciprocity. He said, the golden rule. I told you they were going to steal from us tonight. Responsibility. My question is, by what standard? It is always appropriate in a situation like this when you are talking to devout atheists and humanists who put the descendants of bacteria at the center to ask the question, by what standard? Is it Dr. Chatterjee's mind? Is it his likes and passions and dislikes? Is it the circle and community that he engages with? Where do we draw the circle? Do we draw it over Nazi Germany? Are they the circle we draw it around, or do we draw it larger over Stalin's Russia? Where do we draw the circles, and who's in charge there? Who gets to set the standard? especially considering we're just the descendants of fish in a cosmically indifferent universe. Never forget what bags they brought into the debates. Now, they just simply say it's autonomy, reciprocity, responsibility. Listen, you can't just announce something in a debate like this. Just announcing it doesn't justify it. We need a justification, not just announcing it. It was said that we need caring and cooperation as the foundation of ethics. Caring and cooperation, friends, for the descendants of bacteria. Are we obligated to be caring and cooperative towards one another? Says who? Dr. Chatterjee? Mr. Anderson? Dr. Chatterjee says guilt and shame are unhealthy. Guilt and shame are unhealthy? That claim was made in a discussion about ethics in public debate. Guilt and shame are unhealthy. I say try saying that to the face of the rapist or the molester or the murderer in a court of law. Tell him that guilt and shame are unhealthy. No, it's very healthy. Guilt and shame are very healthy when we are morally responsible image bearers of God. It's absolutely necessary. He said, and I'll just go on the back of Pastor James, you stole my thunder here. Christianity stands as number one in violence in history. Friends, that's laughable. If we just take some of the atheist regimes of the last 100 years, who do you want to look at? Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot? And if you want to ask the question of comparative body count, they win by the ton. And so the question, though, behind that is this: why shouldn't we be violent? Do you see how he's pulling on emotions with his worldview that he doesn't have a right to? He says the Christian church has been violent in history. My question is, what's wrong with violence? Mr. Anderson announces the utilitarian standard. He says we need to have focus on the well-being of others and the pleasure of others. Again, it doesn't do any good to announce the utilitarian standard, just to simply claim it. You can say that human beings like well-being. Okay, that's nice. They like pleasure. Great, that is the case. Utilitarianism, they like well-being, they like pleasure. Just because that is the case, that humans like that, doesn't mean it ought to be the case that we pursue it. Do you know who disagreed at times? Hitler. Do you know who disagreed? The Green River Killer. Do you know who disagreed? All the serial killers of the last 20 years. How'd Ted Bundy feel about that? Brothers and sisters, friends, pay close attention to their bag.
We'll now have a 10-minute rebuttal from the negative towards the affirmative.
I never said that Christian religion is the most violent and destructive force in human history. I never said that. I said Christian religion of all religions is number one in historical violence. There's a big difference between these two statements. And I said that Islam, also a religion based on God, it comes a distant second. Anyway, so I hope I'll be quoted right. Now, what I hear from the other side, from our very respected and honorable speakers, is nothing but arguing in a circle, you know. They're talking about how great the scripture is by citing scriptures. They're talking about how great God is by simply affirming that God exists, you know. We have to go a bit beyond that. And what also they're doing, they are putting the non-believers, atheists and humanists and liberals and others, you know, in the group of all the worst form of human life that we know in history, like Stalin, Mao, and Hitler and all that. It doesn't have to be that way at all. That is to go beside the point, you know. Surely those individuals, no moral humanist who claims morality would go for that and try to defend them. So I think that was a non-starter, and that's beside the point. Humans are purposeless, we have been told. They evolved out of worms and bacteria. Of course, we should believe in science. I'm a firm believer of evolution. That doesn't make us, the humans, without any aim and purpose. We all are autonomous human beings. We are, depending on the education we got, depending on our influences, we have definite purpose in life. The question is, in what direction that purpose is directed to, you know? So those are the important questions. It's not that humans are simply floating creatures, evolved out of fish, and therefore they are just simply floating, nowhere to go. It's not that way at all. We're all human beings. We're not quite like that at all. We have definite purpose. Okay, and this idea, again and again we have brought in this idea of whether we are pro-life or pro-choice, Why can't you be both pro-life, which I am, and pro-choice at the same time? Am I pro-birth? I dare not say that. That's the choice of the woman. That's her decision, That's to be decided between her and her doctors and others. But it doesn't hurt to be pro-choice and pro-life. We all have to be pro-life, no question. Resurrection, we have been told about resurrection and what that tells us. Again, it's a question of faith, We have to have some more justification, some historical account, and some reason to talk about these sort of scriptural proclamations. Otherwise, we are simply going in a circle. And in fact, I would say, if I can say, that Jesus must be then turning in his grave right now to hear all these things. Anyway, so I would like to just make one or two comments, which is that this way to divide anybody or any people, those who don't believe in their idea of religion and their idea of God, as sort of something bad and evil about them, that is the division religion, God-believing religions like theirs routinely make, the division between the sacred and the profane. If we're on their side, everything is sacred and nice, but otherwise, if we question them, and on the other side, then everything is profane. It's not that simple. It's not that simplistic. It's not that way at all. In fact, that simply creates more divisions, which they would not like to promote, and that's exactly what they're doing, So that's not how to go. And I would say, if we look at some of the world's great religions, which are not Christian religions, but in South Asia, Southeast Asia, and East Asia, we find that there is a very inclusive idea, not the divisive idea of sacred and profane, but the inclusive idea of the secular as sacred, which brings things together. And there we find tolerance and diversity and understanding and appreciation of each other, and of course, empathy and compassion. For example, Buddhism, much earlier than Christianity, is a prime example of a very high order moral system based not on God, but on rational moral psychology, something like the one that we have not found since then. And we can talk about those things based on human experience and reason. That's the beauty about Buddhism. And it's a very high order of ethics, most compassionate and most nonviolent of all religions, except one, that's Jainism. That's even more so. I don't have the time to get into all the details of these religions, okay? Then when it comes to also monism, that takes you beyond God, if that's possible, but that's exactly how many of those traditions are, because God is a human creation. In fact, we have been talking about our God the Father and our divine judge, that is anthropomorphic. That's a very primitive idea. But these ideas we find in other religions, they take you beyond God, which we call monism, but I don't have the time to explain that concept, and if I try to, maybe that will not go well with them. They will miss the idea. Anyway, so Jainism, then we have Taoism, Confucianism, all these ideas in the East, they had the profound moral systems, but no God there. In the West, for example, great moral system of Plato, Aristotle, and the Stoics, the ancient Greeks, on which the Western civilization is founded. They didn't have their Christian God, and what a wonderful system they gave us. And then, of course, even today, look at that. The secular ethics of statecraft, which is our US Constitution. Wow, gives you goosebumps to talk about the Constitution that's absolutely secular. No reference and mention of God at all. And that has been the one that's guiding us for all these 200 years, in spite of all the turmoil and everything, and there is no mention of God there. So only two brief comments I'll make, which is that, as I said, God need not be relevant for ethics. God could be extremely helpful and important. It cannot be the foundation of ethics. If God could be of help, then it's what we call, in fact, a faith that is reasonable faith, So something could be reasonable without being rational. And so God, I would like to bring in God vis-a-vis business. This one respect, especially by God, is extremely helpful. That's in business. Organized business is a big business, foolproof business. Thanks to God. You know why? Because to my knowledge, nobody has ever come back from the dead to ask their tithing back, And when we have that idea, business thrives when people cannot come back if their product didn't give them what they wanted, okay? And I would like to make a distinction between fantasy and illusion. God is a fantasy. The idea of God is a fantasy. It can be very helpful, as a fantasy, if it helps us, even though it's not out there true in real world, and if we believe that it is there, then that's an illusion that hurts us. But if we take it as a fantasy, meaning that it's not there, but nonetheless we use it to help us in a nice way to bring in more morality, more understanding and harmony and all that, that's great. Fantasy could be very helpful. For example, Christmas. We know that it is not true that on the 25th of December, Jesus was born. He was perhaps born late in April and us also. Nonetheless, Christmas, what a wonderful celebration it is. Celebration of life. It's a great time, joyous time. We all get together, even though we know that it's not true that Jesus was born at that time. That's a fantasy, but that's very helpful. Santa Claus, even kids know that Santa Claus doesn't exist, even though what a nice fantasy it is, Santa Claus. So my point is that if kids have their Santa Claus, why can't adults have their God?
How much time do we have? Just over a minute. Perfect. Thank you, Pastor Durbin, for saying that just claiming things is not sufficient. And therefore, I want you to all join me in the sacrament of conversation and to practice what is called epistemic humility. And as we move forward in our question and answer session, I think it will be very helpful to remind ourselves, what are we discussing? The proposition that we are discussing is God necessary for ethics? There's been a lot of presuppositional enthusiasm about the Christian God. I have an answer for what happened to the empty tomb, if you want to bring it up in the questions. Where does meaning come from? I am protoplasm, who cares? We could put that on a t-shirt. And what is bigger than us? This group is bigger than us. Once again, objective reality is reality independent of what we believe. Like disease, the Black Death does not care what you believe in. Subjective reality is real because of what you believe. There is nothing more urgently real than a broken heart. And then intersubjective reality is the reality that we create together, and that is where ethics lands.